This is a several-part question. You all have these on your emails if you want to refer to them on your emails as well, and in the same order. Father Aris stressed the importance of giving permission, which leads to creativity. As a leader, how much room do you allow for creative chaos with respect to what Father Evan referred to as the essentials of the faith? And in answering that question, do we risk getting sidetracked with non-essential specifics in this creative space? And what are your recommendations for measuring creative ideas against the essentials? So, anybody, Father Aris and Father Evan?
I feel like a street performer. All right. No, it's good. Okay. You know, and this is, you know, I mean, I have a sense of humor, but I don't think we have to worry about Greek Orthodox churches being overly creative, number one. And number two is, as I mentioned, if somebody has something that's like, just like I said, Las Vegas night, no offense, but, you know, then we just say, no, don't do that, you know. But mostly, I've had a couple of people come up with ideas. I don't want to mention them because if they heard this, they know who I'm talking about. But they don't get any traction. If it's like just like really whack, like a bass fishing club or something, it's like nobody wants to do it. Yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, I got you. I always get these emails from Father, you know, yeah, I'm here standing knee deep in the stream fishing. I said, that looks like fun. So if it's really whack, it doesn't gain any traction. You don't even have to do anything. It's like, because somebody will say, I have an idea to do such and such. I'll go, all right, give it a whirl, see what happens, and nobody wants to do it. So that's been my experience. But Father Evan?
You know, when I look at this question, I think the first way that, or the first answer I would give is that it's important first to develop within your community congruency around what are the essentials. And I think that as we develop a dialogue within our community about not only our vision as a parish and our mission as a parish, as we work on the culture, all of these are related to the overall health of the parish, and as we socialize what are essential elements of the faith, then the amount of control that we operate with can decrease. And the way someone else was asking me this in a side conversation, you know, when we look at control, we lower risk. You following me? And as we let go of control, we elevate risk. Well, risk is moderated by whether or not we've gained congruency around what the vision, mission, and the essentials of the parish are. Okay? So in my parish, as I began, you know, control was very high. Right? It was a daddy model parish. I was in charge of everything. I controlled the vision, the mission, right, the essentials. But as we gain congruency, as we gain health, you have to ratchet down control and allow risk to go up. When risk goes up, you do allow creativity. And yet at the same time, I think as creativity, I think Father's point about creativity is correct, that often our parishes aren't creative, but that's because there's too much control. And we won't innovate in a space where there's tons of control, will we? And we just know that we won't, and people notice that. In fact, when there's a lot of control, talent tends to leave the playing field. That's kind of the rule in the creative space. But if we allow for individual empowerment and engagement, I think Father Aris is correct that, you know, people don't go off the reservation if they know what the vision and the mission is. You know, they're not going to do a Vegas night because they know that's not what we're about. And the system itself will expel it, right? Now, one of the things I think happens in this space that I've talked at length with my leadership is they have to get used to the idea of risk. So when the parish innovates and develops, there's always going to be sabotage and a resistance to change. Yet if we've had that conversation, look, just as you want to be able to innovate and change in your ministry, when this ministry does it, you've got to allow them that space as well. So I guess in my thinking, it's a two-step process. You begin with the socialization, the congruency, and when you gain that, then you slowly bring the control down. The last point I would make is it depends, in our parish, there's a cadence to all the ministries, and there's an amount of oversight to them. So as I onboard someone new, that control is a little bit higher. But as we gain respect and trust for what they're doing, then that control goes down. So some members of my community that I have worked with extensively, there's very little control at all, if any, right? And others, as they come in new, there's a little bit more control until we know that they're on top of what they're doing.
Does anybody else want to follow up?
I wasn't going to change anything that Father Aris or Father Evans said. I was just going to give you an analogy that I think might make sense, because when we're parenting our children, and our children are very, very young, we control a lot more. But our goal as parents is really to launch these children as they grow older, not to keep them under a tight control. And the more that they mature by our guidance, the more we trust them and the less control there is. And I think that's a really good analogy for what our goal in parish life and in our leadership culture that we should be aiming for. And that's where personality and creativity and freedom as persons in the image and called to be in the likeness of Christ gets to be really blossoming in the life of a parish. And that's our goal. That's health.
Good answers, thank you. Question number 2 is regarding leadership training programs. What leadership programs can you recommend for additional training, i.e. a certificate program? And 2, how much time should a parish with limited staff and volunteers dedicate to leadership development? So 2-part question, what do you recommend for additional training, and how much time should a parish, especially one with limited staff and volunteers, dedicate to this process? We're looking, I think it applies to what Steve was talking about.
Well, a very timely question, because I just happened to finish some research on this for a priest. So if you're looking for a certificate program, and really a certificate program is just a guided discovery, so you don't have to worry about putting together your own curriculum. The 2 that I found that seemed to work best for active individuals, certainly priests, one was at Notre Dame University and the other one was at Cornell. Both of those are about 4-month programs. Little difference in the way that they construct their models, but fundamentally it's about a 4-month program. And the price range on those is about $5,000. Which, if you look at kind of a name brand university for that type of program, it's actually a pretty good value. You could look at the Stanfords and the Harvards. Those are going to be more costly to start. Harvard's going to run you at least $50,000, and Stanford has a leadership program that's a little bit more time intensive. They may have a residential requirement. That usually runs about $20,000 to $25,000 for that program. But looking at Notre Dame and Cornell, I think those are the 2 that were most applicable to a busy life and good content as well. The other thing too is, if you're not interested in a certificate program, there's just a plethora of resources out there online. There's 2 websites that I use frequently. You may have heard me mention this, is tomrainer.com. It's THOMRAINER. And he's basically a marketing machine. I mean, he's a consultant. He does a lot of research. He's been a pastor, but he's always coming out with online programs, and they're good. I mean, they're not going to be a Notre Dame level, but it's good grounding information, and then he has a lot of materials that frankly he sells at a pretty good price. The other one I've seen is the Unstuck group, Tony Morgan. Tony's got a number of podcasts as well, and again, they provide development in leadership, and a variety of programs online as well. So both of those, I think, are probably good 2 starting points to just kind of get grounded on what you want to learn and the depth of what you want to understand. Christianity Today is a website. If you go to their leadership section, and I think the annual subscription for Christianity Today is about $150 or something like that. But they've got every topic you can imagine in their leadership library. And most of them are a collection of writings, but still, all of that is free. And they actually give you a reprint, no-charge reprint up to 1,000 copies per article that you want to use. So if you're having a seminar or just want to pass it on, the reproduction is free. But again, you start to look at their library, and it's anywhere from welcoming teams to, working with a board, their term, to planning, to just the full gamut of everything you can possibly imagine. And then a lot of things that probably don't pertain to what we do. There's another one, if you look at more church administration, there's a small, simple site, but this is her orientation. It's Church Smart Management, and churchsmartmanagement.com, and they'll have anywhere from interview forms to personnel filing, recommendations, and then they do some leadership as well. So smaller website, but usually targeted more on the administration and management side. And then I would suggest there. Now, also, let's not forget our own Ancient Faith Radio. If you look at the podcast from Father Evan, for Bill Marianas, just about everybody that you've heard giving and attending seminars has been on those programs and shared their perspectives on all the different elements of parish life and leadership. So I'd really encourage you to go there, because it's there. And you can listen to Father Evan 3 times a day if you like. And so I would encourage you to look there. So my recommendation is go online, take a look at the resources out there, figure what you like, and then once you calibrate that, then look at, if you want to go to the next level, then look at the certificate programs, and that'll give you a better idea of what you're looking for. Okay.
I'm just going to add one thing.
You guys want to follow up?
I'm just going to add one thing. It wasn't actually part of the question, but since Steve said if you want to go up another level, there is, beyond a certificate program, and especially those who've already done graduate work, postgraduate work, you can get into a Doctor of Ministry program, which is designed specifically for people in full-time ministry. And so usually it's 3 years of academics. Most of it is done online, but most of these DMin programs require 1 week per class in seminar with your professor and your classmates or your cohort. And there's a lot of programs across the country. So there's a lot to choose from, and what you do is simply look for what you're specifically interested in studying, and then look at the personality and the approach of each school's program. And then after your academics, you actually are to design a program that's usually seamlessly addressing your ministry. And you conduct that project, and then your thesis is around the problem that you're trying to look at, and then the results of that project. And everybody that I've talked to who's gone through that has found that it's been very seamlessly geared to what they're actually doing. And so it's not like you're taking time out of your life, it's actually adding and enriching your life. So that's probably another level, and that's just short of a PhD, because a PhD is mostly residential and it's very academic oriented, but this is actually more practice and ministry oriented. So I just wanted to add that other level.
Anybody else? I'm going to go to question number 4. We'll come back to 3. Again, I think this applies to presentations from Father Evan and Steve. How does a person find a coach, a business coach? How does a person find a business coach? Go ahead. Coach? Yeah, go ahead.
Am I supposed to take this?
You don't need to.
When I looked at that question, Father Jim, from whoever submitted that, the first thought that came to my mind was the quotation from Matthew, verse 10, chapter 7. If he asks a fish, he will give him a serpent? It's a question mark. If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father, which is in heaven, give good things to them that ask him? Therefore, whatever you would ask men to do, you even should do for them, for this is the law and the prophets. So I think the context for this question is obviously our own personal transformation, and it's, I think, well noted by those of us up here that these questions are driving towards the right answer, which is the overall health and transformation of ourselves and of our communities. And so I would say that in my experience what happened was I realized, as I said in my presentation, that I didn't know what I was doing and I was struggling. And so where's Holly? Holly and I were talking about this last night. It got so bad that I actually prayed. And I begged God to help me. And I think our loving Father, when he sees the desperate plea, he answers with good things. So I think prayer is the first step to that, to ask and beseech God to send you someone. I don't necessarily like the idea of just calling it a business coach, because the gentleman that I used wasn't just that. He was not a business coach. He was a coach. He was a mentor. And while I have a spiritual father, my spiritual father would, easily say that he's limited. His perspective on some of the topics that I wanted to explore was very narrow, and so it wasn't as if I was going outside of that relationship. I was enhancing my own circle of mentors. So I think to beseech God is a start. The second thing, and Steve, I think you mentioned this, you don't have to look far. They're in your community. There are experts throughout your community, and the minute you stop thinking of yourself in that sort of pyramid structure, you on top, everybody below, but look at it as a circle, and you start to look around and understand your parishioners as peers, you'll be astounded by who's there and the level of training that they've had. So I think you can begin looking inside the community, and then you can start to look outside, just around. One of the key coaches that I found, I don't just have one, is he's a fireman. And believe it or not, many of those institutions like the fire department, police department, they have a high degree of training as they go up in rank. And so I am working with the fire chief of Loveland and the divisional chief in Fort Collins. And they're both dear friends, and I meet with them, and they do a lot of team training, and those are two coaches that I've used. Steve, why don't you add some thoughts?
Well, like anything, to accent what Father said, is you have to figure out what you want. There are coaches aplenty out there, but it depends on being very specific and having an understanding of what you're looking for. So when I hear the term business coach, that means, frankly, nothing to me. Mm-hmm. It's way too broad. Do you want to understand, financial planning? Do you want to understand, if you're looking at a specific leadership coach, the caution on that is if you go out and do a search for leadership coaches and that sort of thing, that can quickly take you into the life coach segment. And that's a whole different area, right? So what you want to be able to do is, my advice is just begin talking to people within your community, and if there's someone within your parish that has been, quote unquote, successful in doing whatever they do, and you develop a relationship with that person, there's one thing that people love to give, and it's advice. There's a coach, and then there's also a sounding board. And everyone beyond father confessors, but you need to have somebody that can say, okay, I'm thinking of this idea, and I'm thinking programmatically now if you're leading a ministry or whatever, and just find that person as a sounding board and say, give me a reaction to this. Give me an honest reaction. Am I making sense? What am I missing? And I absolutely assure you that there are people in your community that would love to fill that role. But it's, again, it's not something that can be forced in that regard. I've got one individual that I use, and he's very thoughtful, and it's almost to the point where I hate asking him, because I know he's going to ask me 15 questions, so I just better be ready for a long conversation. There's never a short conversation. And so that's why I go to him, because he provides a type of thinking that I don't have. So the caution, again, is if you're going to go out and look for leadership coaches or business coaches, you know, if you want if you want a generic coach, you can go to the universities. University professors, or almost all of them, provide consulting. So that's if you're actually going to go and look. There's other local, and this becomes more localized. Well, actually, that's the next question. Do you want a coach that will be a face-to-face coach, or do you want somebody you can just call? So another group that I failed to mention, I mentioned him yesterday, is Ken Blanchard, located in Southern California, but they do a lot of executive coaching and leadership coaching. And so if you were in Southern California, I would say, and that was of interest and you felt it was a need, then you could contact a group like that. Coaching costs, just to give you a frame of reference, a good coach is going to be, a really good coach is going to be in the $300 to $400 an hour range, but most coaches are at about $100 to $150, $175 an hour range, and most of them will start the first set of meetings, maybe the 6 to 8 meetings that you'll have, work on something, and then take a step back and see how you're doing. So that's another calibration point. Wish I could be more definitive, but it really starts with asking the question and being very clear on what do you want to develop. Again, do you just want a sounding board, or do you want to develop a very specific skill? Okay. Anybody else?
Please give 1 or 2 tools we should take away from this conference and apply in our parish. Please give 1 or 2 tools we should take away from this conference and apply in our parish. I thought this would be good for you. So, okay.
So actually, to reiterate what Steve said, you have to figure out where you are and what you want. So I feel like, you know, don't leave any tools on the table. Take them all with you and take some time to process, maybe even schedule some time, you know, first maybe on the drive home or the plane trip, and then schedule some time a week from now to reflect on, you know, what really is sitting with you. I know, you know, of course, we have Jamil here, we have Effie Marie here. We provide some very specific tools, so if those are of use to you, but each of us are in a different place. And I think the biggest tool we have is the network of the community that we've built here. And so Holly Benton is here with the Orthodox Christian Leadership Institute, so that's another leadership opportunity. Some of you are aware of also Michael Hyatt. He's another leadership resource online. And then, you know, just in the conversations we've had together, Father Tobias mentioned a personality inventory that they've used in their metropolis that you could ask him about. So just, you know, I just would plumb sort of the conversations and the notes that you've taken. And for me, like, one of my takeaways is to live in concepts, and that's something that Father Evans spoke about in his talk, because I think a lot of times, you know, we're looking for the checklist of, okay, you know, if I want to attain health, like I need to work out, how many minutes is it, how many times a week, how many calories am I allowed to eat? But rather it's more helpful for each person to live in concepts. And maybe one of the concepts that we start to live in is that we continue to ask for help and continue asking both God, but also this network of community that we have. So don't leave here and feel isolated, but keep coming back to the community.
Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I'll have one thing. So, if you really want to be good, if you want to be excellent in the concepts of leadership development, and really anything that's, we're not big-brained people that, you know, only we can know this, right? It's certainly speaking for me. But we have a passion about this area. And when I've been to seminars and wanted to learn something new, it doesn't come easy. You've got to dedicate your time to it. The biggest takeaway that I would suggest, if you really, really want to learn this area and be smart and effective using these tools, is really dig deep on every presentation that was presented to you. The amount of information that was provided, I think, was exceptional, myself excluded. But the content and the information, dig into that information. I am sure, speaking for my co-presenters up here, is that if they got an email with a specific question on their presentation, they would probably answer that email. Am I correct? Is that, you wouldn't turn them away, right? So, but dig into that information. Study, learn. You can do this, and there's absolutely no reason next time this thing comes around that you can't be up here talking about your experiences and how you've impacted your parish or your ministry. But if you want to dedicate, you have been given the information, now dig into it and really, really learn it. I would almost say memorize it, but that's the level of, if you really want to break through, because the challenge we have now is, and the challenge with adult learning, is that we are so saturated with information, and from what Thomaida said and others, myself, it's know what you want and then go for it. So if you want to be really steep in leadership, you've been given some good tools and presentations. Watch the ancient faith replays of these presentations and get to a point where you can go, okay, I understand what they're saying and I understand the base concept. So if not, then go to these websites, and all the information in terms of the background of it is all out there on all these websites. So, you know, apply yourself to it, and you can learn it. I absolutely guarantee it. So,
we're blessed to have two former long-term missionaries on the panel, and everyone else here is, many of them have done short-term mission work. So the next question, I'll ask Father Martin to take the first stab at it, but it's how do we convince the parish that funding parishioners' participation in overseas mission is an investment in the health of the parish? How do we convince the parish that funding parishioners' participation in overseas mission is an investment in the health of the parish?
As you mentioned, Father Jim, a number of people have been involved in missions. I just want to see anybody who's been on a short-term or long-term mission, just raise your hands. So question for you is, would you say that did anything in your life? If it did, raise your hand. Okay. Other hand, if did that come back to the parish in any way? If you think so, yes, raise your hand. If you noticed, I mean, if you're not sitting in the back and you're in the front, a lot of people were raising their hands. And one of the interesting questions that got addressed, and some people think of this, it's like that expression, if your grass is dying, don't let the water spread into your neighbor's yard. It's a Greek saying, apparently, I've heard. I don't know if they water their grass in Greece, but the idea is, oh, we got so many needs here at home. How can we spread anything outside? Because we got our own needs. We got to take care of our own needs first. Man, that's just it's a common mentality. So I guess you could turn it around and say, well, if you want something to happen here, go do something over there. And things are going to start happening here. If you don't reach outside of yourself, nothing's going to happen inside yourself. How do you convince people of that? That's a whole nother thing. But what we see time and time again is you get involved in mission, And it doesn't matter. If you do it at home, you're going to want to do it other places. If you do it other places, you're going to want to do it at home. The two are just, they're one and the same. It's just separated by geography. So all of you who've been around, you've seen things, and you come back with some new ideas, some new vision, and you want to get involved. I had one priest, small little parish in a strip mall. He had 11 of his kids go on a mission. He says, Father Martin says, this is the greatest thing because it's building my parish. These guys are coming back with enthusiasm. They're alive. They're vibrant. It's changed their lives, and they're all just, it's building up the parish. So I think if anybody happens to come across people who get into that modality, which I do all the time, how to convince them, you need somebody who's good at convincing. The facts, but the facts are that getting involved in something outside the parish enlivens the parish itself. Here's your convincer.
So I just want to share a little story. I've been at a church in central Massachusetts for 15 years. And when I went to that church 15 years ago, St. Constantine and Helen in Webster, Massachusetts. When I went there 15 years ago, they had a budget of $64,000, their entire church budget, $64,000. And I don't think I'm exaggerating to say they never did anything outside, reaching outside of their church. Everything was about trying to just take care of their own and survive. And what was basically happening after 85 years was that the church was dying slower, dying. So I went there, and the first budget I worked on with my parish council, I said to them, I want a line item of global missions, national missions, local missions, and a priest discretionary fund. Put $1,000 in each. Not a lot, but $1,000 for a budget that was $64,000, $1,000 each. And my parish council president looked at me and said, Father, we're going to send $1,000 to Africa when we can't even pay the bills in our own church. And I said, yes, that's what we're going to do. And you know why we're going to do that? Because that's what it means to be the church. Because that church in Africa or Albania or Mexico or anywhere else, that's our church. And when we learn to be the church, you're not going to worry about paying the bills of your local church. They will come. Now think for a moment. 15 years ago, a church had a $64,000 budget, was basically declining, dying. My own metropolitan said to me, I didn't think in 15 years that church would still have its doors open. Since then, we have sent that little church that never did anything outside, we've sent more than 100 people to Project Mexico. From our church and from the local churches, we organize it. 100 people to Project Mexico. We've sent some on OCMC trips. We've sent them out. And what's happened is the more they've gone out, the more they come back with a spirit that has transformed our church. So the best example I have is someone who was my parish council president for 3 or 4 years. The first time he went on a mission trip, I was organizing a trip to Project Mexico. Took 5 people the first time I went. And some people in my parish council were dead set against us going out. And I tried to convince them literally over 5 months of parish council meetings why we're going to do this. I wasn't asking for their permission. I was just letting them know what we're going to do. And they were fighting against it for 5 months. Anyway, I still went, took the first group of 5, and one of the first people to go with me was a man who had a teenage son. A very successful businessman in his mid-40s, and he goes on a trip to Mexico. He comes back, and when I have everyone talk in church about their experience, he says, I have to admit to everyone, that's the first time in my life I've ever done any volunteer work. A very successful 40-something-year-old man, faithful Christian, first time he's ever done anything. It transformed his life. Since then, he's been to Project Mexico 5 times with all 3 of his children. He's now the first one in my parish. Anytime we started up, because of going overseas on a mission, we started in our church once a month, first Saturday of every month, Living Bread Luncheon. We serve 100 people in our local community. And this man has been the spearhead of that activity, bringing it back to, and he's ready to do anything. It's just one example of someone whose life was transformed by going somewhere else and then coming back. And sometimes it takes, now people always say, well, okay, why don't you do that outreach locally? And I said, well, we do. We're going to help Habitat for Humanity in 3 weeks in our church. And we'll do things locally. We'll help the local homeless shelter. We started this Living Bread Luncheon. But it's not either or. And this is one of the things we have to understand as the church. Christ said, right before he ascended, he gave the Great Commission, go and make disciples of all nations. He also said, all authority, he said, I'm going to send you the Holy Spirit and empower you, to his first disciples. And he said, you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and in Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Never did he say either or. Start in Jerusalem, when you finish, then go. No, he said and. So it's never either or. And it doesn't matter. The example of our local parish was, it was a parish that literally never did anything going outward. When we started doing things outward, it transformed our church, a church that my bishop thought in 15 years might be closed. 15 years later, we're a vibrant, healthy church. We renovated our whole, we spent from a $64,000 budget, we did $1 million renovation of our whole church. So taking care of our own. We've sent 100 different people on missions outside. And it's changed the whole spirit, the whole culture, the character of our church. So I can't highlight enough, and I always say to my students who I teach at Holy Cross, when you go into a parish, and if your parish is dead and dying and not interested, very introverted, that's the reason why you have to start sending someone outside. And you begin with, even if you get 2 people, because those 2 people who go are going to come back changed people. And they're going to be your co-workers in helping to change the whole spirit and the whole culture in your local parish.
We talked about a little bit about stewardship. I mentioned that Father Evans' parish did away with pledge cards because I think they're way on the front end of the curve. Father Luke's parish did something that I think will inspire you. I think you need to tell that story.
So, remember, a church 15 years ago had a $64,000 budget, right? Was hesitating about sending $1,000 overseas to help a church. So this year, we're celebrating our 100th anniversary of our church. When I was started there 15 years ago, I was the 43rd priest in its 85-year history. So it shows you how dysfunctional and the past history was. Anyway, this year we're celebrating our 100th anniversary, and we thought, what can we do to celebrate? We have a year-long celebration. We kicked it off in November, last November, and we're going to end it this upcoming November 2020. So we thought together, what can we do to kick off our 100th anniversary? And what we wanted to do is we wanted to do something that could engage the whole congregation and help them understand, what does it mean to be the church? Who are we as a church? What should we do? So Bill Mariana, some of you have heard him speak about stewardship, very dynamic speaker. He came up to the Boston Metropolis and gave a 5-hour seminar on stewardship. And he threw out all these different ideas. So he threw out one idea that my stewardship chair and I heard, and we loved the idea. And we took it and we adapted it to our situation. And so what we decided to do to kick off our 100th anniversary, said on Stewardship Sunday, November 2019, instead of handing out stewardship cards and asking everyone, what are you going to pledge and give to the church for next year? I said, instead of doing that, we're kicking off our 100th anniversary, and we're not going to ask you to give anything. We want to give you, all our parishioners, a gift. And what we decided to do is, we decided to give out $30,000 to our parishioners, giving every parishioner an envelope with either $300 if you had a family, $200 if you're a couple, $100 if you're an individual. And we're giving you $300 cash, $200 cash, $30,000 we gave to our parishioners. And we said, this is a gift from God to you. Now, we want you to use this gift to glorify God in whatever way you want. Be creative, talk to your family, your children. Let your children really be creative in thinking, how can they get engaged in glorifying God with a gift that God gives them? And of course, this is only the beginning. For a year long, we're going to be talking about this for a long time. But of course, the whole point of this is to say, we're blessed by God every day with gifts. What do we do with those gifts? How do we glorify God? Do we understand everything we have is a gift from God, and we're blessed so that we bless other people, so that we share the blessings with others. So we kicked off our 100th anniversary in this way to create the whole spirit of what we're doing for this 100th anniversary. Who are we as a church? Are we a church that's only caring about ourselves? Are we a church that wants God's blessings for ourselves? Or are we the body of Christ that's called to reach out to our larger community? And my prayer and hope, what we said when we gave this gift, the only thing we want back, we're giving you a card. We want you to tell us, what did you do with the gift? How did you glorify God? How did you feel when you did that? And what was the response of whoever received the gift? No names. Don't tell me. I don't care who did it. I just want your stories, because we're going to use these stories to inspire one another to do more. And hopefully, the whole purpose of this is to instill this spirit of who we are. We are God's children who bless the world, who give out to the world, who reach out beyond ourselves. For some people, for me, for some people who are generous givers, okay, you get $300, you're giving away, no big deal. I mean, that's not a big deal. But I knew for many of the people in my parish, it would be a big deal. Maybe for some of them, it's the first time in their life, literally, they're giving away $300, $200, $100. And I challenged them to, if you can, make it personal. I mean, some people just ended up giving to charities. But I said, if you can, make it personal. So we're starting to get back the stories. I've gotten back maybe 25 stories so far. By the end, I hope to have 150 stories of what people have done. But what has been the most beautiful fruit of this effort, someone said to me, Father, when I heard you said do this, I thought, okay, this is some gimmick. I mean, you're just trying to do something as a gimmick. And I really emphasized, it's not a gimmick. It's just a tool, a method we want to use to instill something very serious. The joy of giving, who we are, the blessings we have, how we're called to share, and it's all about us being a light to the world around. And the stories I've gotten back so far, they're so inspiring, of families with children discussing, talking, reaching out to families in need, inviting them over to their house, having them for a dinner, giving them gifts to these families in need, the children wrestling and debating on how to use this. I mean, people have taken this very seriously. How can we be good stewards of this gift that we have? Just recently, just 3 days ago, I had a discussion with one family who had 2 children. They were talking about what they wanted to do. And this was a family that lives a comfortable life in a comfortable setting. Our church is in Webster, a town, probably a lower class town, lots of people struggling. And so he connected with one of the people who live in our town who work at the Dunkin' Donuts. And at first he was like, okay, you know what my children and I want to do? We want to go buy 20 Dunkin' Donuts cards, $20 cards, stand at the Dunkin' Donuts, give them to people, and just wish them a blessed day, saying, here is a gift from God for you to enjoy the day. That's what his initial idea was. When he talked to my parishioner who works at the Dunkin' Donuts, she liked the idea at first. And then she said, after a week, I've been noticing there's a homeless man, who lives in his truck, and he parks his truck every night at the Dunkin' Donuts. Wouldn't it be more helpful to engage with this person? And so then they're thinking, okay, maybe we need to help this homeless person. And then she came back and said, a week later, and said, you know what? One of my coworkers at Dunkin' Donuts recently got divorced, going through all kinds of trouble, went to Michigan to try to get her life settled, failed out there, just came back, has nothing. She's trying to get her life resettled. And so she's talking with my other parishioner. He calls me up and says, well, what should I do? Should I do this? I want to do something with my kids, but is this need real? What if they don't use the money in the right way? And it brings up a much larger discussion about helping people in need, engaging in their life. This guy who comes from a comfortable setting, that's not his world reality. And yet he's getting pulled into a reality of people who are struggling, and he's being challenged. And he's saying to me, well, should I help? I'm not sure if I should help. I don't know. So he talks to me, and I'm like, listen, my worker who works at the Dunkin' Donuts said, listen, the person needs $500. She said, I'll put in $100. And I said to the guy, okay, listen, I'll put in $300. You put in $100 of your own money, and then save the other $300 the church gave to do something with your kids. And he did do that, but it was beautiful to see him wrestling with how to help others. My person who works at the Dunkin' Donuts looking and seeing for people in need. The children thinking about this being an ongoing discussion in their house. That's the whole fruit of what this exercise is all about. So it's really been an incredible blessing.
Thanks, Father. Father Aris, I think you spoke about group-based ministry. This question is, why does it work and what are the limits? Do you want to take the lead on that?
Sure.
Okay. So the question? Group-based ministry and discussion. Why does it work? What are its limits?
Great. So why do small groups why does relationally based ministry work? It's because it fosters relationships, which is integral to what the church had always been and should be. And if we're honest about our existing churches, even the ones that are more healthy than others, there's a lot of people there who are intimate strangers. And the more they can relate to one another on a deeper level, as we perhaps saw when we had gathered for our breakout sessions yesterday, the more people begin to change. The more one can speak about one's faith from a personal perspective and from an emotional perspective, the more that faith gets integrated into our lives, and that begins to change us as well. And so that's why it works. There are the theological basis is this is what the church was like and should be, and there's a psychological basis as well. And as we know, the two are very easily integrated. And we then arrive at the point where the apostles were, where they had everything in common. And as we know, one of the fallacies of the distorted postmodern world is people want us to have Christian values where we have everything in common without having Christianity, and then we wonder why it doesn't work. Are there limits to it? I think the only possible limit would be is if you would have some sort of an unstructured curriculum that then allowed people to run free with their understanding of what the church is and what the church teaches, and of course that includes what the Bible is and what the Bible teaches. And the way that one avoids that is to have a curriculum that keeps people on track. And then even though I recommend the priest takes a step back from the process so that people can be allowed to have initiative and be empowered, the priest does keep track of what's going on and helps to mentor the group leaders and etc. And I was using an illustration yesterday with someone on the bus, and I have to change time, places, and geography, or omit them entirely. But I went on a retreat sometime in the past before I was ordained with a group of lay people from a parish that was not my own. I was invited to go. And it was around the time of Great Lent and Saturdays of Soul. And they were talking about the rich man and Lazarus. And all of us know the message of the rich man and Lazarus in a nutshell is that if you are rich and keep stepping over poor people, that you're going to go to hell. And that's true. The Bible promises that, right? The only time that Jesus promises us to go to hell is if we don't take care of the least of our brethren. And but they were obsessing, because of Saturdays of Soul, they were obsessing over the fact that the rich man goes, "Could you dip your finger in the water? I'm dying down here." And they said, "I'm sorry, there's a great chasm between you and me." And so they were focused entirely on, why do we pray for the repose of the souls? Here's what the Bible says. And it was like, Lord have mercy. It's like being down in Georgia or South Carolina, no offense to them, but it's that kind of the Bible says mentality. But that's what happens when people just kind of run free with their interpretation of things. That's why, of course, why we have tens of thousands of Protestant denominations. But if you have a curriculum that is preset with questions that are not encouraging one to speculate on exegesis, but instead encouraging people to apply the essential lessons of the faith, of Scripture, of the Church to their own lives, you run a very, very low risk of people getting too far afield.
Thanks for this. Anybody else want to speak on that? Okay. Thank you. Any outreach and evangelism mission discussion would not be complete without bringing up this question. And we have a bulletproof vest and a hard hat for anyone who wants to take it on. Do factors such as Hellenism, ethnicity, and heritage or Greek culture have a place in the parish vision and or mission statement? Do factors such as Hellenism, ethnicity, heritage, or Greek culture have a place in the parish vision and or mission statement?
So the mission statement is a reflection of your governing values. So each parish has a unique set of governing values, and they need to decide what they are. And if that is part of your governing values as a church to proclaim, to project Hellenism into the world, or to continue the use of the Greek language because of its essential truth, if that's your governing value, it should be in your mission statement. If it's not your governing value, it doesn't belong in your mission statement. And since I'm a believer in empiricism, let's look a generation from now, which church has expanded out into the world and grown and helped the poor, and which church hasn't. I'm willing to wager that one set of churches might do better than others, but yeah, if that's, and I'm not, when we meet with churches, we frequently ask the question, what does this church mean to you? This is a great question to ask with your parish council. And you'll be surprised at the answers. And the truth of the matter is that there are many churches that this remains their governing value. Now, I think the broader question is, how do we help churches understand what their governing values should be? And the way that's done is not by attacking the symptom. It's by attacking the underlying cause of that symptom. And of course, we waste a good bit of time in this country debating language, which is where we really should be talking about governing values and the purpose of the church. I will confess to you, I study Greek virtually every day of my life. I want to be as proficient as I can in the Greek language. I refuse to engage people in per se language debates. It's ridiculous because we should be talking about why the church exists. And I don't mean to demean the person who asked that question. I think it's a legit question. And you can go to churches and scratch deep enough, and you're going to find out, exactly what the underlying values of a church can be something like, I wish this church were like my church in Atlanta in 1978. I wish this church were like my church in Chicago in 1963. I wish this church could be the way the Russian church was during the time of Seraphim Vissarov. These are the underlying governing values that people have, that if you scratch deep enough, they come to the surface. Then we need to help people deal realistically with what those governing values are, and help them understand that in the 21st century, after 2,000 years of lived Christian tradition, that there probably should be governing values that are more in line with what we believe as Orthodox Christians.
Thank you, Father Aris. Father Martin. And Father Evan, all I would ask you to do is to give that correlation, which is just a fact on growth versus language later. Okay.
So I would ask a question back. Is there anything wrong with culture? No. Are we allowed to have culture? Does Jesus Christ bless culture? So, of course, my professor used to say, yes, Father Martin, you have to learn Greek because that's what they speak in heaven. So, okay, he believes in his culture. That's okay. You can have that culture. What happened at Pentecost? God came and everybody didn't start speaking one unified language. They all understood in their own language. God blesses culture. Culture is the coolest thing in the world. I just love going around the world and meeting different peoples and learning all these new ways that culture is expressed inside the church. It's just fascinating. In marriages, in baptisms, when we're worshiping, you see the cultures and how the cultures unite with God and with our expression of ourselves. We live inside a cultural window. We see the world through a cultural perspective. Okay, and what's my perspective? I know, I'm like, okay, I had parents or grandparents who I all thought were Greek. I just did the DNA test. They're not. So, surprise. It was a cool surprise, okay? So anyways, I used to after, meeting the Greeks at seminary, I used to kind of say, it's like, I don't think Greek, I don't smell Greek, because, these guys didn't take showers, they were on the basketball team, and they'd all come in smelling, and it says, I'm American, but with this generation to me. So, I have my culture. I have to acknowledge that culture. It's how I see the world. Now, how do you bring that into church? What happens? Is it okay to live our culture in church? Of course it's okay. Could I start a Hispanic church? Would that be okay? Or would there be something wrong with that? You can't be Spanish. You shouldn't speak Spanish in church. You're in the United States. Can I start a Chinese church? Of course. What's wrong if there's a group of people that are culturally living inside this country, feeling isolated, feeling vulnerable? What's wrong with having a church that ministers to them in their culture? It's okay. That's how the Greek churches, that's what we were when we came over as immigrants that were looked down upon, grease balls. What did they call our grandparents? It's okay to have culture in the church. But is it okay that becomes the reason for church? The reason? Well, no. Okay, there's something bigger than our culture going on, so it's balance. Our culture has to be in balance, and sometimes it can get out of balance, and that's what we react to, out of balance. But that doesn't mean throw it out. Is it okay that we don't have a non-Greek vision to reach all those people that don't have Greek culture? No, that's not okay either. And do we make them all Greek? No. We have to respect culture. So as far as the question goes, balance is important. And the lack of a vision that goes outside that culture by a national church is wrong, and that's what I react against constantly. That's what I fought against in seminary. I wanted to paste on the wall, if I don't understand the language, what good is it to me when St. Paul says that? And when it came time for field work, what did I do? I volunteered to go to St. Nectarios, which was down the street there in Roslindale, where it was 100% Greek. Why did I do that? Because I had no internal conflict about speaking Greek in a church where they didn't speak English. That's what you have to do. So you get where I'm going, right? I get a little, a little excited about it.
Can I just say something else? Yes. But I think to put it in practical terms, and I thank Father for that discussion. In the 2000 census in San Francisco, there were 3,500, 3,600 self-identified Greeks or Greek Americans out of a city of 800,000. There are 2 Greek Orthodox churches just within the city of San Francisco. Now, obviously, the Bay Area is much larger than that. People drive from one area to another, but it is not Chicago. It is not Boston with regard to the number of Greek Americans. If a church is going to survive in that environment, they need to be the church. San Francisco, thank God, and from my perspective, has 90% of the people that don't go to church. And I say thank God because it can be a mission church in that environment. And so I have to ask myself, what are who's out there, and what is their culture? And which culture am I going after? Because you can't evangelize every culture at once. And Father Martin, who studied this, can give you great explanations about people groups. But then, if San Francisco had 300,000 people who spoke Greek as a first language, who had never been in church, we'd be doing everything in Greek. That is not our actual cultural context, and we are acutely aware of what our cultural context is. Father Martin did speak about balance, and it is a delicate balancing act, making the transition from being an inwardly focused church hanging on to an ethnicity versus a church that's apostolic. But that's why all of us up here get paid the big bucks. And we manage that balancing act. But that's it. What's your culture, and who are you trying to reach? And then everything gets driven by that.
Just that correlation, I think that's just a fact, right? Okay.
So Father Jim's asked me just to bring up a data point. Father Aris mentioned kind of the empirical evidence, and we do have empirical evidence about what the influence of culture and language, specific culture and language, has on attendance and engagement in our parishes. It's our own study. We did it. We commissioned it. Alexei Krindich, have you looked at this study? Don't just look at the executive study, but look at the full report. He asked a series of very important questions. One of the questions was, to what degree does your community emphasize your Greek or cultural language? And so this was a study of all Orthodox parishes, so it could have been Russian or Serbian or Romanian. To what degree is your parish invested in its heritage? And then what programs do you have in your parish that emphasize or influence the life of your community related to language and culture? He asked that question, and then he asked a series of questions about overall engagement and the life of the community, how many people attend liturgies, what's the level of engagement in sacraments like confession, and the rest. And then he took those answers, and Alexei he's just a researcher, he just overlaid the answers. And what he found was that in every area of the United States, in every subculture of Orthodoxy in which language, like specific language, Romanian, Russian, Greek, culture is emphasized, participation goes down. Do you guys understand the correlation? And that every place in which that is not important, it flips. Well, I think, to me, when I read the study, what was important to note was that we've talked a lot about the idea of health, but what we haven't talked about this weekend or this week is barriers to health. And that's another topic. But if you decide that you want to lose weight, but you don't stop eating donuts and hamburgers and drink Coca-Cola and smoke cigarettes every day, it doesn't matter how much time you spend on a treadmill, right? And in another talk, a series of talks that we gave under the guidance of Thomaida at the Reclaiming the Great Commission conference that she put together last March, the first talk was really about barrier building. And there are four barriers, four general areas of barrier building that we erect in our parishes. The first barrier is called imbalance. Some of that's been alluded to. The second is stagnation or inward focus. Another barrier is called autocracy or autocratic thinking. And the fourth one, I've got it here, sorry, I didn't mention it. The fourth one, called blind spotting. You can look up that talk, but here's the point, Father Jim. You wanted me to bring up the statistic. When we think about our parishes, I mentioned the idea of a funnel, and I think you're alluding to it, Father Aris, when you talk about culture. Does our culture erect a barrier? Or, as you talked about it, Father Martin, does our barrier invite participation? Does it connect us with people? And too often our parishes are about barrier building. We're about high walls, narrow doors, with big locks on them. And we have to think about our parishes being open places, open campuses. How is it that we are engaging and inviting? So I think that study indicates that when we elevate certain specifics, we create too many barriers between us and the surrounding community.
Thanks, Father Evan. We're at 11:20, so I think it makes sense to wrap. I know you have flights to catch and places to go, and there's food that's been set out for us. Thank you again to Annunciation Parish and all the people that got involved and helped that made this happen. I'm going to ask Father Theodore to come and offer a closing prayer for the seminar. Thank you.
So before I close in prayer, I really want us to take just a moment to pause, because from Monday evening to just now, you've heard 5 complete different presentations, all focused in one way or another on being the church and being as healthy expression of the church in our locale and in the world as possible. And someone shared with me it was like receiving information from a fire hose. And Steve has really challenged you to go back home and to dig really deep. And thank God for Ancient Faith Radio and all of their ministry. It's probably not radio anymore, it's Ancient Faith Ministries, that they're going to have this recorded and available to all of us so that we can go back and reflect on it. It's important that we apply what we have been presented, and then how that gets filtered in our own lives. This conference and any conference like it will be successful only to the degree that it transforms us, and that the fruit of that transformation is that it spreads to the local system in which we exist, our churches. So my prayer is in the application of what we've learned, that it changes us, that we do not allow ourselves to go back to our default. And it's going to end at a really, really beautiful time as we're about to embark into the Triodion and into the Lenten season. And so I want you to just pause for a second and think and reflect on what you have received. Lord, Father Martin ended his presentation with the fact that you are everywhere present and that you fill all things. Help us to never forget to intentionally be reminded and remember your abiding presence in our lives. That you go before us, that you go before every human being, that you have created every single human being in your image and have invited them and called them into being to become like you, to partake of you, to participate in you, to be part of your holy body, to be part of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And yet we know that without our cooperation, this cannot be possible. You are sending us out. You are sending us out to everyone who is hungering and thirsting for the truth, to be a part of your kingdom, to be a part of the church. This can only happen if we are healthy Christians and if our parishes are growing in health. We ask that all that has been presented, all that has been shared amongst us, all that your Holy Spirit awakens and enlivens in us can be put to action, can be applied in our own lives first and in the lives of our parishes, in our metropolises, in our archdiocese, in the neighborhoods in which our churches exist, and in the cities. You have asked us to be lights that are put on a hill and shine in such a way that people may give glory to you. Help us to be instruments of that light, of that truth, and help us to be life givers and bearers of health. We ask all of this in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.